Chapter 711, Fiancé 1. Seeing the finger pointed at me, and the silence that followed, I couldn't help but look at the Marquis strangely. You want me? I smiled before shaking my head. That would make the deal unbalanced. I'm worth far more than what I've required. While my words did sound arrogant, I knew my worth. Besides Delilah, there was probably nobody else in this room who was worth more than I. On the outside, I was a new graduate from Haven, nearing the 7th tier. My progress was just as fast, if not faster, than Delilah's in the past. I was also an extremely capable emotive mage, and I had connections with a prince from another empire. On paper, I was already worth quite a lot. That was without factoring in the bone of a primordial ranked creature currently in my possession. I also had 2 destroyer ranked pets, and a terror ranked will. One that belonged to a dragon. There was also the Eye of Oricleus, the mirror, the sword. And let's not forget the fact that my brother is a literal god, including me. This deal was shit regardless of how much I thought about it. It was just unfortunate that most of these people weren't aware of how much I was truly worth. So you're saying that you're worth more than my knight? Hearing the Marquis's words, I didn't hesitate to nod. Yes, I am. Haha. The Marquis laughed, genuinely finding the situation funny. Alongside his laugh, I could feel the way that some people looked at me change. It was almost as if they were looking at me as though I was some spoiled, arrogant kid. Oh, are you not aware as to who my knight is? Quote. I am very well aware. Captain Albaz was a tier 7 body user, one with a very promising chance of reaching the 8th tier. In terms of strength, he wasn't any weaker than Almighty and Wobbles. No, perhaps he was stronger, considering that he was close to reaching the 8th tier. He was also only 45 years old and had an extremely clear track record. He was someone who had hardly ever lost. This was all the information that Noel had told me with regards to the captain. His resume sounded impressive, but it didn't leave much of an impression on me at first. Still, since Noel was so adamant, I was determined to give it my best shot. Since you're aware, why do you say that the deal is uneven? Unlike you, Albaz has repeatedly shown his capabilities over and over again. It won't be long before he reaches the 8th tier. And what about you? The Marquis looked at me up and down. You're impressive for your age. Then again, plenty from Haven have reached the same tier. You also had a habit of vanishing during your academy days, so there's not much known about you. Sure, you seem a bit stronger than your peers, but so what? The Marquis's eyes narrowed as he leaned his body closer. Advancing through each tier only gets harder. Besides, the Marquis's gaze lingered briefly on Delilah before returning to me. Aside from a rare few, most can't keep progressing at the pace they once did. If you think you'll continue advancing as quickly as you have, you're being far too arrogant. Oh, my brow raised. He was making a lot of good points. On top of that, you've got no real achievements to your name. The only thing that stands out is your age, but even Albaz was the same at your age. He reached the 6th tier too. It took him a decade to reach the 7th. That's how it usually goes. That sounded rather impressive. That's why I'm calling you arrogant. If anything, the deal is only slightly unfavorable for me. You stand to gain more. I'm wagering a proven knight against an untested cadet. Tapping his finger against the table, the Marquis's eyes narrowed as he looked at me and then the people sitting around the large oval table. Is my demand unreasonable if I put it this way? Several people shook their heads. They were mostly the people belonging to his camp, but I could see it in the eyes of the many others that they also felt the same. Smiling, I leaned back against the chair while looking at the spectacle in front of me. I guess this shouldn't come as a surprise. In the end, there really is not much information about me. Although it is kind of obvious that the Marquis is downplaying my abilities, but it's not like I can argue against him even if I want to. That would mean I'd have to reveal several of my cards. I'd rather not do that. In that case, I guess you do make a valuable point. Scratching the back of my head, I looked at the Marquis, and our eyes met. I sat there like that for a few more seconds before eventually nodding. Alright, then. In the end, I realized something. It didn't really matter to me whether they knew my worth or not. I never planned on losing anyways. The deal was unfair, but it was also true that I was trying to demand more from the Marquis. In hindsight, however, that would just make things extremely annoying for me. I guess I shouldn't be too greedy. This is already enough. Good. It seems that I've managed to talk some reason with you. The Marquis then turned his attention towards my father-in-law. In that case, should we start finalizing the deal? I'm sure that everyone here wants to get this part of the meeting done. The Marquise's words drew a few chuckles from around the room, including one from my father-in-law. With a tap of his finger on the table, the doors opened, and several people entered, carrying documents which they handed to me and the other members of the REIT. All I need now are a few signatures. Once that's done, the right will be formalized, along with the stakes. Central will oversee the entire process, and if either side fails to uphold their end, they'll face the consequences. Following a brief pause, I quickly scanned the documents in front of me, surprised to see all the terms that we had talked about written in the papers, before picking up a pen. It's kind of creepy how they've managed to get everything written down so fast, but maybe it is due to some sort of artifact. In the end, pressing my pen down, I signed the paper. And like that, I had officially entered the right. Here, shortly after, the people from before moved behind me and retrieved the paper. Looking up, I saw that the same thing happened to the others, and there was a noticeable change in the atmosphere. This persisted even in the following hours as the topic of conversation was changed to something else. Quickly, frankly, I didn't remember what was discussed at that time. All I could think of was the right and who I could call for. It wouldn't be impossible for me to call for Almighty, right? There was no rule that said that monsters couldn't be allowed. But I was a little skeptical about it. Wobbles can be used too, but neither of the two is very great in frontal combat. They're both better as supports than anything else. Things would be different if Pebble had managed to reach the destroyer rank. Unlike Almighty and Wobbles, Pebbles was actually extremely powerful in direct combat. If it were Pebbles, then I wouldn't be worried. But, it's really a pity Pebbles failed. In the end, I needed more time to think about who to bring. I already had a couple of people in mind, but taking into account that the entire rite would require 8 participants, I needed to think about the missing slots. Alright, it looks like we've discussed everything that needs to be discussed. Snapping me out of my thoughts was my father-in-law, who stood up from his seat with a satisfied smile. Looking at everyone in the room, his gaze paused on me for a brief moment before looking away. The meeting is dismissed. I hope to see you all next week during the rite. I'm sure it will be an exciting event. And with that, he directly left the room. Delilah followed closely behind him. The entire time, she didn't say a single word at all. She just sat there without much of an expression. She didn't even spare me a glance the entire time. It was a bit of a pity, but it wasn't like I was much different. I was too preoccupied with my own thoughts to think about anything else. In the end, similarly standing up, I left the meeting hall. But just as I was about to leave to enter the main hall, a soft voice whispered behind me. I wish you the best of luck for next week. By the time I realized who it was already too late as the Marquis left with his entourage. I blinked a couple of times before shaking my head and leaving. Reaching the main hall again, the first thing that caught my eye was Evelyn and Kira, who were seemingly fighting over food. That was at least how it seemed at first. However, moving closer, I realized that the issue was much deeper than that. Your palate is, quite frankly, immature. To truly appreciate this cheese, you'd need a more refined tongue. There's a rich, nutty umami note that reveals itself if you get in close. What the hell is even that? What language are you speaking? Ah, so Evelyn is just being weird. This wasn't strange. I did notice that Evelyn was a bit particular about food. I gradually approached the two, and as if sensing my presence, they turned in my direction. You're back. Wait, listen to this. Evelyn here. I know. There's no need to say any more. I'm actually here for something else. I looked at the two. Considering their strength and talent, along with the Verlice House's alliance with ours, having them serve as my representatives wouldn't be a bad choice. Kira's father also seemed to have a good impression of me. In that regard, it wouldn't be outrageous to ask her. Not only that, I'm sure the two of you have already heard about it, but Stopping mid-sentence, I looked at the two strangely. For some reason, they were both wearing strange looks on their faces. Confused, I was just about to ask why they were making such faces, but as I slowly turned around, the reason quickly became clear. Come with me. That was all she said as she turned around. Numbly staring in her direction, watching as her black hair swayed with each step, I looked back at Evelyn and then Kira, who both looked at me. I then heard Kira's soft mumble, "What did you do this time?" That, I wasn't so sure myself. Chapter 712, Fiancé 2. Right after the meeting ended. Moving out of the hall, Orson calmly walked ahead while Delilah followed him from behind. Neither made a sound as they moved. The silence lingered as the two stepped into a quiet, empty office. Though no one else was present, the room was tastefully furnished. Paintings lined the walls, chairs and sofas were neatly arranged, and at the center was a large oakwood table where Orson made his way to and sat down. As he sat down, he crossed his legs and looked at his adoptive daughter. "What do you think about the current situation?" "It is not bad," Delilah answered flatly, looking around the space before sitting down on one of the sofas and taking out a chocolate bar. "Re-up." Orson pretended not to see her actions as he continued to speak. "Do you think he'll be capable of winning the right? It would be quite troublesome if he doesn't." Orson had long foreseen something like this happening once the incident occurred. He was well aware that many noble houses in Central had long set their sights on Evanis territory, not just for its gold mine, but for its prime geographical position. Over time, the Evanis household had become a tempting prize, a piece of the pie that left many nobles salivating. Orson had warned the others not to provoke members of Central, but it seemed his words hadn't been enough to deter them. Central wasn't as harmonious as many people would believe. There were several factions within Central, and while he could control them to some extent as the head of Central, now that the elections for the next head were about to start, the noble houses had all started to reveal their fangs. In particular, Marquis Wilshire, who, in truth, was operating under Duke Morrison's orders. It'll be quite troublesome if someone like him rose to power. It wasn't that Duke Morrison was a bad leader or anything like that. If anything, he had an exceptional mind and a powerful force. But the problem lay in the fact that his greed knew no bounds. He was someone who highly coveted the throne, and as such, was an extremely dangerous individual. Only lunatics would try to compete against the Megrail household for the throne. Their power was so deeply rooted within the empire that trying anything with them was simply suicide. Someone like that. I can't let someone like that become the head of Central. Munch, munch. As Orson snapped out of his thoughts, he looked at Delilah as she emptily stared at the ceiling while eating her chocolate bar. The Duke's mouth twitched. Are you not going to reply to me? What do you tea? No problem, Delilah replied after taking another bite of her bar. The way she ate so casually, eyes drifting toward the ceiling, made it seem as if she didn't care in the slightest. This made the Duke frown. Are you sure about that? This is quite important for the future of Central and the future election. If he somehow... No problem, Delilah once again replied with the same nonchalant tone as before. Her eyes remained fixed to the ceiling as she ate. Never mind, Orson sighed, shaking his head quietly while mumbling, what am I going to do with her? In the end, he decided to shift the topic of conversation. Setting that aside, you're still going to go on with the made-up fiancé story of yours. You know, I've got several proposals. I'm not asking you to get married, but it's also for my sake since I'm constantly getting bombarded with requests. Be it this empire, or others. Taking a moment to look around his desk, the Duke opened up one of the letters. Ever since the moment our paths first crossed, your presence has never once left my thoughts. You have lingered in my mind with a quiet persistence, as though you were always meant to be there. The Duke stopped after reading the first two lines. This was simply too much. The worst part of it all was that there were over a dozen such letters each day. Even if he tried to tell people to stop, they just wouldn't stop. The best solution was to get her engaged. Listen, Del, you're of age now. I know that given your powers, you'll be able to outlive practically everyone here, but you're still in the prime of your life. I am engaged. Delilah raised her hand to show her ring. She pointed at it. My engagement ring. Looking at the ring, Orson frowned. That was an engagement ring. Quite frankly, it just looked like a plain black ring. One that he had seen many commoners wear. The Duke tried to say something, but in the end, he lowered his head. And sighed. All right, let's just say that you're engaged. Can you at least tell me who your fiancé is? I'd like to meet him at least once. Sure, if you're really not lying to me, then The Duke paused, his eyes blinking repeatedly as he looked at his adoptive daughter in shock. He didn't hear wrongly, did he? I said, I know, I will bring him. Delilah rose to her feet and carelessly tossed the wrapper to the floor before making her way to the door. With each step, the soft click of her heels echoed through the room. Staring at her back, the Duke was skeptical. She isn't going to use this chance to run away, right? He knew his daughter quite well. She was certainly the type to do this, and as he watched her open the door and leave, Orson found himself leaning against his chair as his arms crossed. All sorts of thoughts started to cross his mind. I don't believe that she actually has a fiancé. Definitely not her. I doubt there's anyone in the world capable of truly reaching her heart. Most likely, she only agreed to the idea of an engagement for the sake of appearances. If that's the case, she might have chosen someone at random to pose as her fiancé, just to get me off her back. The Duke knew his daughter well. In his mind, there was simply no way for her to be interested in any man. In that case, this was most likely just something staged. But I don't see the problem in this. It's not like I want her to get engaged anyway. It's only for appearances. If she's engaged and found someone to pretend for her, that's also fine. The Duke relaxed a little as his thoughts paused there. If she really did bring someone to act as her fiancé, then things were all good. That would be Ahida. Clank. The door suddenly opened and two figures walked in. One was her daughter, and the other one was. The Duke's expression stiffened at the sight of the man who followed closely behind her. He walked with a straight, composed gait, his black hair neatly in place. His features were striking, well-proportioned and no less captivating than his own daughter. But what stood out most were his eyes. Deep hazel, they held an enigmatic allure, a quiet pull that seemed to draw in anyone who met his gaze. The moment he appeared, the Duke recognized him immediately. How could he not when he was the main subject of their conversation not long ago? But it was also because he recognized him that the Duke's face turned strange as he looked at his own daughter. Seriously, he almost burst out laughing. Of all people that you could have brought, you brought him. The Duke did vaguely recall Julian once expressing interest in getting engaged to his daughter, but he had dismissed it at the time as nothing more than a convenient excuse. Nonsense conjured by Julian to escape his own engagement. Not only that, but Delilah was also the chancellor of the academy that Julian attended. This is ridiculous. Orson shook his head as he dismissively waved his hand at his daughter. If you want someone to pretend to be your fiancé, at the very least make it realistic. Realistic? Why? Delilah cocked her head, her large obsidian eyes blinking at her father. What do you mean, why? The Duke massaged his head, feeling a massive headache approaching. He alternated his gaze between the two. Let's not talk about the fact that he was just one of your cadets not too long ago, but the two of you have quite a significant age gap. I'm not sure by how much, but it's not normal. And, Delilah blinked her eyes, looking even more confused. She could live for a lot longer than normal. The little age gap between them was meaningless. So what was the problem? That's, the Duke sighed again, shaking his head shortly after. Choose someone else to pretend to be your fiancé, Del. Choose someone your age. It would make it more realistic. If I announce the engagement between the two of you, nobody would believe it. In fact, it would make things even more annoying for the two of us. Delilah's brows furrowed tightly upon hearing her father's words. But I'm not joking. He is my fiancé. She raised her hand and showed him her ring again. At the same time, she grabbed Julian's hand and showed him his ring. It looked identical. That's just a cheap ring. Anybody can wear a ring like that. Just because you're both wearing matching rings doesn't mean that you both are engaged willingly. Delilah's brows furrowed even more tightly upon hearing the Duke's words. She had previously thought that this would have been enough to convince him, and yet it only made him more dismissive. Del, I know you're stubborn, but think carefully about your decision. I know that you're only doing this for appearances, but if you want to do it, at least do it with someone more realistic. Nobody is going to believe that you actually like him. Delilah stood in silence, listening to her father's words without making a single sound. She could tell from the way he was speaking that he didn't believe her at all. Suddenly, she was reminded of a certain scene she had witnessed not too long ago, and she turned her attention towards Julian. He was standing next to her with a lost look on his face. He was likely searching for the right words to say, yet he seemed unwilling to interrupt the Duke. As a result, he just looked lost. Like I said, Del, what you need to do is. Delilah didn't bother engaging with her father anymore. Grabbing Julian's chin, she turned his head in her direction, and she pressed her head down, feeling his soft lips against hers. In that moment, the room turned quiet. All noise ceased. All besides one, the sound of her rapidly beating heart. Ba, thump, Chapter 713, Fiancé 3. From the moment Delilah told me to follow her, I already had an idea of what she was planning to do. It was for that reason that I was nervous. But even then, I wasn't too nervous. I had experienced far scarier things and had even escaped death multiple times. I was ready for whatever was to come. I was ready to get scorned at. To get shouted at. But none of it had me ready for what happened next. Exclamation mark question mark quote. Feeling Delilah's hand pull against my chin as she turned my head, before I even had the time to process the situation, something soft smacked against my lips. It was as if a jolt of electricity ran down my spine. My thoughts blanked in that moment, and besides the soft, warm, and a little wet sensation, in that moment, it was as if my mind had exploded. I just lost myself in the sensation. But the sensation didn't last for very long. Just as fast as she lowered her head, she raised her head. Is this enough proof? She eventually let go of my chin, but as I slowly started to process the situation, and mind cleared up again, instead of elation, I felt short. This was too short. Not only that, but it also felt rather abrupt. It wasn't as if I didn't expect something like this to eventually happen. But no, not this way. This was just a light peck to some extent. I wasn't satisfied at all. However, it wasn't like I could think about this for very long as my attention soon fell on my father-in-law, who alternated his gaze between the two of us with an expression that seemed far apart from his usual calm one. He looked in complete and utter shock. His mouth was open, and his face was pale. I could see his mouth open and close repeatedly as he tried to say something, but as though the air had been stripped out of his lungs, he wasn't able to say a single thing. He just stood there, staring at the two of us without any words. A strange silence filled the surroundings. But it wasn't for long as Delilah spoke again. This time, she sounded a little annoyed. Is this not enough? She looked back at me, and my heart skipped a beat. Don't tell me. No, it's enough. Orson's words came out right after. His voice almost seemed a little bit too loud as he appeared to have forced himself to speak. I was also somewhat grateful, but at the same time disappointed. Thankful that I didn't have to go through with another peck, and disappointed that I didn't go through with another peck. That doesn't even make sense. I rubbed my temples, but soon Orson spoke again. You're really not putting up a show when you're doing this, right? If you really want him to be your fiancé, that's fine. I just didn't think you'd. It can only be him. Delilah answered a moment later, cutting father-in-law while keeping her expression straight. Orson's face froze upon hearing her words, and soon, his gaze fell on me. I felt an invisible pressure bear down on me the moment he looked at me, but I kept my face straight while looking back at him. My heart skipped a beat for a short moment as I got mentally ready for the potential chewing that he was going to give. But, what about you? I received an unexpected question from him. What do you think about this engagement? Are you okay with it? She didn't force you into it, right? Force me. I thought for a moment, and I almost nodded. In hindsight, she did force it onto me. She just suddenly pulled me aside and told me that she was engaged. It later turned out that I was the one she was engaged with. Quote. The room temperature suddenly seemed to drop as I was about to nod, and when I felt the back of my hair slowly starting to rise, I immediately shook my head. No, not forced. It was willing. Is that so? Orson's eyes narrowed a little as he looked at the two of us. He really did seem to be doubting the situation. In the end, I sighed. Yes. I looked at Delilah. I'm really not forced into this engagement. I really want to be engaged with her. I wasn't lying. I had long realized my feelings. Not only that, but the thought of her getting engaged to anyone else made me want to puke. It could only be me. While it was a little early, that didn't matter. I had already made my decision. Really. Nodding again, and as if sensing how resolute I was, Orson eventually sighed before sitting back down on his desk and covering his face. This was honestly not something that I was expecting. Whether you two are lying to me or not, I don't really know. However, your engagement is a little problematic at the moment. The two of us looked at the Duke. Problematic? In what sense? However, I realized rather quickly why. Given that the current right of arms is taking place, and I'm supposed to be neutral, the fact that the two of you are engaged might make it seem like I'm not a neutral side. In fact, it might also make it seem like you're one of my pawns. This will obviously be contested by the other households, let alone the Marquis. Tapping into the table, the Duke looked at the two of us. Regarding your engagement, it's not like I really can't control it. If Delilah really wants to get engaged with you, I can allow it. However, it's impossible for me to announce it to the world just yet. It'll be a little bit after the right of arms has ended. And the voting for the next head is announced. Is that okay? That's fine with me. I didn't see anything wrong with this arrangement. It made sense to some extent, and it wasn't like I minded waiting. At the end of the day, the engagement was already a little rushed. Del, but it only seemed like I was the one satisfied with the arrangement. Even after the Duke called out her name, Delilah didn't respond immediately. Her brows were furrowed slightly, and her eyes were cast downwards. But in the end, she nodded. Okay. It was only then that a smile finally blossomed on the Duke's face as he looked between the two of us. Perfect. In that case, I'll send the engagement documents to the Evanis household later so that you two can formally be engaged. Once everything is settled, we can have the official announcement, alongside a potential date for your wedding. Standing up again, the Duke's face turned a little complicated as he looked at Delilah, then me. I do hope that you two aren't rushing the decision to be engaged. If you two wish to no longer be engaged, you'll have until the day you two will officially be engaged. Once that time passes, you two will no longer be able to cancel your engagement. Is that okay? Yes. I nodded, and so did Delilah. All right, you two can leave. I have several things that I need to take care of in preparation for the upcoming rite. Understood. And with that, Delilah and I quietly left the office. Right as we closed the door outside, the two of us didn't immediately start walking, as I stopped for a moment to look at Delilah. She stared at me without saying a word, but I could tell from her expression what she wanted to say. I stopped her before she could. No, I didn't like it. Exclamation mark question mark quote. Delilah's eyes widened. She looked almost shell-shocked. However, I wasn't lying. It was too short, too abrupt. It was just a peck. Call me greedy, but that was too little for me. Too little and too abrupt. I looked around me before fixing my direction towards the path that led to the main hall. Then, looking back at the still shocked Delilah, I smiled slightly before heading in the direction of the main hall. Just so you know, I'm not counting that one. I'd want to do it again, but now wasn't the time since we were just standing outside of the Duke's office. The mood was also not very great. Yes, I'm not counting it. Quote. Delilah stood in silence, staring at Julian's departing back. She stood there stunned, unable to properly process the situation as she thought about his previous words. No, I didn't like it. It was too short, too abrupt. It was just a peck. Just so you know, I'm not counting that one. Julian's words repeated in her mind over and over again. Too short, abrupt, just a peck. Her mind was in a daze. In fact, she almost had a heart attack thinking that he didn't like it. But after he explained it, she realized what he meant. Was it too short? She didn't really think about it. She was just trying to prove to her father that she wasn't lying, but as she recalled the sensation from before, his soft yet warm lips, and the tingling that arose in her body, Delilah felt something within her stir as she pressed her hand against her lip. It was something that she had never felt before, and for a brief moment, she felt that she wanted the moment to last for longer. But she also knew that it wasn't the time for that and quickly pulled away. Even so, just thinking about it made her realize something. He's right. She also felt that it was too short. But the reason why it had to be short was that her father was present. If he wasn't present then. Quote. Slowly, pulling her hand away from her lips, Delilah once again stared in Julian's direction before turning away. Single quote. I'm also not counting it. Chapter 714, The Emperor is Dead 1. Quote. You came prepared, but even with all that effort, it's still nowhere near enough. You should have done more. But then again, it wouldn't have mattered. None of it matters. Noelle's voice echoed within the quiet confines of the Emperor's chambers. The Emperor was dead, so was Prince Gale. The entire situation had unfolded in the same way that he had expected it to. Turning his attention towards Dawn, Noelle shook his head. Figuring out our intentions was never hard. I'll praise Torin for his ability to foresee what we were planning on doing, but that's still far from enough. Like I said, none of it matters under the watchful eye of someone who has seen it all. Noelle's voice stirred something in Dawn. Staring in Noelle's direction, a soft fluctuation radiated out of his body, and the world around them seemed to freeze. This situation, it was a failure. In spite of everything that he had done in order to ensure that everything flowed well, who would have ever thought that they had a traitor in their midst? No, I should have seen this coming. Gale had always been strange. Ever since the incident where he had his mana sealed, he had acted differently. However, the pain was all for the great cause. It was only going to be temporary. He was going to be free in the near future. And yet, he had been swayed by Noelle. This failure of foresight had led to the entire situation. But it wasn't too late. Not yet. He could still set things right. As long as he caught Noelle, everything would fall back into place. The Emperor was dead, yes, but if he could recover his blood, then. You're thinking about using my blood to revive him, right? Noelle's words thundered inside of Don's mind as his head flicked in his direction. Before he could even open his mouth to speak, Noelle smiled before shaking his head. You won't revive him even after you use my blood. You think I would simply try to kill him without thinking about this? Laced on the sword that Gale had used to kill the Emperor, Noelle had placed a powerful poison that completely degraded the soul of anyone who consumed it. His blood could bring the dead back to life, but there was a limit. While the Emperor might be able to be revived, he'd just be an empty shell. The best they could do was use some sort of body-swapping technique and place a new soul into the Emperor's body, but that would be rather problematic. To attempt something like that, they'd need to find a compatible soul, at the very least, for someone as powerful as the Emperor had been. And even then, the entire operation would take years to complete. Could the Empire survive that long without its Emperor? The answer was simple: they couldn't. Quote. The surroundings grew silent in that moment as Don's expression fully cracked, his brows furrowing tightly as the world around them fluctuated wildly. But despite his anger, Don was still able to remain rational. He understood that the situation was turning for the worst. However, things were still far from over. Noelle was here. So long as he caught him, then. Snap. Don didn't waste a single second. With a single snap of his fingers, light burst forth from the point of contact, pulsing outward in waves, unfolding like a shimmering veil that draped itself over the surroundings. The surrounding temperature increased, and Don's eyes turned a golden hue. His body started to shimmer with runes as a lance manifested in his hand. Without wasting a second, he brought the lance up and swiped in Noelle's direction, slicing his entire body into thousands of pieces. Swoosh. But was that really enough to take care of Noelle? Quote. The moment Noelle's body was torn into thousands of pieces, those fragments began to pull back together, seamlessly reassembling until his form stood whole once more. He was completely unshattered, but Don didn't mind. Killing Mortem was impossible, but he was currently severely weakened. He understood that Noelle couldn't keep this up for long. And he wasn't wrong. Noelle indeed couldn't keep regenerating forever. At the very least, not when he didn't have a heart. Swoosh. Don sliced down with his lance again, the single stroke so fast that it seemed to teleport directly to him. Noelle couldn't react, and his body was severed as a result. But in the exact moment that his body was severed in half, a faint pulse echoed across the surroundings. Bah! Thump! It beat only once, but that was enough to put everyone in a daze, including Don, as his movement stopped for a split second. That split second was all that Noelle needed. As his body quickly reattached itself, he fixed his gaze towards the window and towards the dome that surrounded the entire space. His eyes grew even more hollow in that moment. Bah! Thump! Bah! Thump! The rhythmic thump of a heartbeat echoed louder through the surroundings. So loud, in fact, that for a brief moment, the world itself seemed to tremble in time with it. His mana began to swell, building steadily as a terrifying pressure erupted from his body. His eyes turned bloodshot, veins bulging, and a thin stream of blood trickled from his nose. Quote. Lowering his head, Noelle glanced at his hand, then dragged a finger across his palm, opening a long, crimson line. Without hesitation, he flicked the blood toward the dome. Bah! Thump! Bah! Thump! Bah! Thump! The sound of the heartbeat drummed even louder than before. All of this happened in less than a fraction of a second, and as Don shifted his attention back to Noelle, their eyes met. And then, flick! Noelle flicked his finger, a single drop of blood shooting past Don and the window before shattering the dome that surrounded the entire palace. Crack! As if triggered by a chain reaction, more cracks began to spiderweb across the dome, spreading rapidly in all directions. Don's face changed at the sight. But then, the single drop of blood that had shot into the distance began to shift and contort, morphing into a familiar figure. Don's expression darkened as he turned, only to find that Noelle's body had vanished without a trace. Single quote. Damn it! His teeth clenched tightly, and with a single tap of his foot, he appeared right outside of the dome, his gaze shooting towards the fleeing figure. Don's eyes narrowed as he looked at Noelle. He could see with just one glance that he was struggling. His face was pale, and his breathing was rough. In that moment, Don's previous thoughts faded, and his expression returned to its usual calm. He extended his hand forward. And then, a gigantic hand materialized above Noel, smashing down on where he was at incredible speeds. Hundreds of droplets of blood funneled out in all directions. The droplets turned into figures moments after, scattering in all directions, and as Don stared at them, his brows furrowed tightly. Single quote. You really do know how to run. My mind was still in a daze. Thinking about everything that had just happened, how could I not be dazed? But more than anything, I was both disappointed and mad. I'm definitely not counting that. Absolutely not. That damned woman, only going for a peck. Just wait until. Are you okay? You look kind of out of it. It looks like he got chewed up by the Chancellor, didn't he? What did you do this time? Bringing me out of my thoughts were two familiar voices. When I raised my head, I saw both Kira and Evelyn looking at me strangely. His face in particular looks a little pale, Evelyn pointed out while Kira brought her face a little closer. Now that you mention it, what are you two doing? I stepped back while looking at them strangely. But it was my reaction that made them look at me even more weirdly. Why is he so jumpy? The Chancellor must have touched him. Kira mumbled, and my entire body stiffened. She wasn't wrong. But how did she know? No, wait, this is Kira that we're talking about. You think the Chancellor would touch him? Evelyn asked while looking at me. Kira's deep red eyes bore down on me for a few more seconds before she looked away. Nope, she's out of his league. I was just messing. Figured. No, hold up, I actually did get touched. She was also my fiancé. Anyways, what were you trying to say before you left? Before, I blinked a couple of times, a little confused with the abrupt change in conversation. But then I suddenly recalled. Ah, right, I then started explaining to the two of them about what had happened and how I needed 8 representatives for the upcoming rite. So you want the two of us to be your representatives? Both of them looked at me weirdly. You do know that we have talented knights in both of our territories. If you want to borrow them, then, you two are more than enough. I was already aware of both of their strengths. While neither was as strong as Leon, they were still incredibly strong. Put in any other academy, they'd be ranked first. They were generational talents. And I was also familiar with their powers. That made things a lot easier for me. Kira and Evelyn both looked at each other. They looked confused, but after a while, they both nodded. Sure, I owe you. My family is already in an alliance with yours, so even if you don't ask, my father would probably push me to help. Nice. Hearing both of them agree, I found myself smiling. That's 2 down. If I count myself in, then that would mean that I have about 5 more missing members. That shouldn't be too difficult. Things would be even easier if I were allowed to include Almighty and the others. But that was probably not allowed. Even if it was, I wasn't sure they'd be of much use since this was direct confrontation. Well, in that case I will. Clank. A sudden disruption cut through my words as the entrance doors slammed open, and a figure dashed inside. Face pale, hair wild and disheveled. What's going on? Who is that? As all the guests turned their attention towards the man, before the guards could escort him out, he shouted. The Emperor is dead. His words echoed loudly within the hall. All noise ceased. I repeat, the Emperor is dead. Chapter 715. The Emperor is dead too. The Emperor is dead. I repeat, the Emperor is dead. The voice tore through the hall like a broken alarm, startling everyone present. The noise surrounding the hall faded completely in that moment as all eyes stared at the disheveled figure that had suddenly made its way into the hall. He's dead. He's dead. The silence persisted. All eyes remained fixed on him. And then, boom, the entire place erupted in chaos. The Emperor is dead. What sort of nonsense is this? Is this some sort of joke? The Emperor is extremely powerful. How could he die like this? This makes absolutely no sense at all. Is this a joke? It's a terrible one if it is. This calls for treason. There were many that had already left the venue, but there were just as many that had remained. The noise that came as a result of the sudden news was ground shaking as everyone's faces paled. Some couldn't believe what had happened, while others were angry. But then, it's true, I've just received confirmation from the Megrail family. The Emperor is dead, and so is the first prince. What? How could this be? I wasn't really surprised by the first piece of news. I had long seen this situation coming. It looked like Noel had succeeded with his plans. But at the same time, I didn't expect the second piece of news. The prince is dead. Isn't that Aoife's brother? How is this possible? Kira's and Evelyn's faces both turned serious as they looked at each other. The usual casual mood of theirs was completely gone, and in its place, I could see worry in their eyes. I knew instantly why. Aoife, thinking about how she was currently feeling, my heart sank. This wasn't part of the plan. Why did her brother die as well? I could somehow explain the situation with her father, considering how he wasn't exactly who he said he was. But her brother, everyone knew just how much she looked up to him. If she were to find out that the one who had potentially killed him was my own brother. Oh God, I could practically feel a massive headache starting to form. I'll need to think about how to handle the situation if she ever finds out. Would I need to tell her the truth? Or would I need to make up some sort of excuse? I wasn't really sure, but it didn't matter for now. I never planned on having her learn about my involvement. This was just the worst-case scenario. What now? What's going to happen now that the Emperor is dead? After the chaos, a brief silence settled over the room. The Emperor was dead, and uncertainty rippled through the crowd as people began to question what would come next. But within that stillness, I sensed a quiet shift. Something in the air had changed. It was small, but it was noticeable. And it felt extremely sinister. That's when I remembered the look on their faces, and realized exactly what the strange feeling that hung in the air was. Greed. An endless amount of greed. If you would excuse me, I will have to leave for my household. Now that the Emperor has passed away, I will need to find something to pay my respects with. Me too. I will also be leaving. A heavy feeling settled in my chest as I stared at everyone who was leaving. In that moment, it didn't take a genius to understand what was going on. Now that the Emperor was dead, and the first in line to the throne was also dead, the seat for the throne was empty. There were still several candidates poised to rise to power, and with many noble houses aligning themselves with them, I could already sense the scent of gunpowder in the air. This situation, everything was unfolding exactly as Noel had envisioned. And at the same time, the Noor's Ansifa Empire, an empire that had long prided itself on its unity and absence of internal conflict, was now experiencing its first true internal strife. I should have never have listened to myself. Aoife stood stiffly, staring at the corpses in front of her. She just stood there in silence. She wanted to make a sound, but nothing came out of her mouth. The world around her seemed to have slowed down completely. People moved alongside her, rushing towards the corpses and trying their best to do something, but Aoife knew. She knew that there was no saving them. Staring at her father's head, and then her brother's punctured body, she remained frozen on the spot. I should have listened to myself. I should have been a busybody. I should have gone with them. I should have. Her thoughts stopped. Aoife realized all too well that even if she had gone, nothing would have changed. In fact, she would have most likely have died with her dad and her brother. The two people that she cared about the most in her life. The two people that didn't judge her like everyone else. The two who had been there through her hardest time. The two that she could call family. It was this realization that made everything sink in as the world seemed to suddenly resume. Quickly, get the medics here. Get working quickly. Aoife slowly brought her hand to her chest. And for the first time, she felt it. The pain that came from the realization. She didn't cry. She couldn't cry. The pain was simply too much for her to bear. It left her breathless. It sucked the energy that she had. Feeling the pain growing even more pronounced, Aoife's entire body trembled as she closed her eyes, allowing for the darkness to take over her mind. If this is a nightmare, please make this stop. Hawk. A sob finally escaped her lips, and as it came out, Aoife stumbled back, finding the anguish and pain tear through the walls of her chest. It was also then that it came out. Her heart-wrenching scream. Someone. Stop this. Despite the turmoil raging in the outside world, within the confines of a certain cathedral, everything remained utterly silent. It was as if the noise of the outside world had been completely sealed away. Within that heavy silence, a subtle yet distinct sound broke through. Twitch. A lone figure sat upon the polished marble floor, his gaze unnervingly calm as his body twitched at irregular intervals. Blue veins snaked across his skin, which began to melt and shift, peeling away only to slowly reform. Twitch, twitch. His body continued to twitch, melting rapidly on multiple occasions. But even then, the figure remained still. He embraced the silence, ignored the pain. He, quote. Slowly opening his eyes, Torin's gaze fell on the figure that stood not far from him. Watching him, observing him, quote. You're still here, Emmett? Just in thought, Emmett replied, his gaze falling towards Torin. He looked at him with pity. You will fail, quote. I know. Give up. I won't. Still stubborn, quote. It is not me that is stubborn. Torin smiled, his body twitching once more as steam began to rise from his skin. If stubbornness is the measure, then you are the most relentless of all. After everything I've done, you still persist. Why can't you simply die? Because I have things to do. So do I, Torin replied, his eyes losing the light in them. You're selfish. Am I? You're fighting for your brother while I'm fighting for the freedom of the world. Do you not understand how vital what I'm doing is for this world? For the people who have survived up until this point? Torin's voice turned slightly hoarse as he spoke. It also grew louder with each word that came out of his mouth. Twitch, twitch, he clenched his teeth, quote. Your brother is immortal. His voice rose. He will never die. Why are you so hung up on what happens to him? I'm doing all of this for the sake of humanity. Your brother should be honored to serve me. To serve humanity. Bang. Torin smashed his fist against the marble floor, cracked spider webbing in all directions. Why can't you understand this? I thought you, of all people, would understand the bigger picture. You, quote. You still don't get it, do you? Emmett's cold voice cut through Torin's words. He stood tall, his black hair framing a face that wasn't strikingly handsome, but certainly pleasing. What set him apart was his gaze. Light green eyes so profound and intense, they seemed to peer straight through everything, as if seeing far beyond the surface. Your desperation has led you to turn your back on everything that made you human. On everything that, so what? Torin cut Emmett's voice as he slowly stood up from his spot, his entire body twitching as the dark veins around his body pulsed with even more intensity. If I have to give up on my humanity, let it be given up in pursuit of power. Steam rose out from his body. The weak obey rules. The strong reshape reality. He slowly brought his hands towards his face as he stared at them with his bloodshot eyes. His shoulders hunched subtly. I reduced the mirror dimension to fragments with nothing but my hands. Shouldering the burden of the world as it begged for change. They called it treason. I called it destiny. Slowly clenching his hands into fists, he directed his attention towards Emmett. Was I meant to kneel? To follow your madness? You feared my ambition, my power. But it was that very ambition that offered the world its first glimpse of freedom. I am the one who shattered the prison that kept us sealed. I am the one destined to save us all. He pressed his finger against his temple. My mind. He pointed at his eyes. My vision. He brought his hand before him before clenching it. My hand. The surroundings fell silent. This world is void without them. I have grown strong enough to stand against them. To save this world and grant us freedom. But even so, power breeds fear. Torin slowly calmed down, his chest starting to relax, and his gaze turning cold. I can feel the fear. Not just in the people, but even in the other gods. They call me a tyrant in secret. They talk about my madness, but what they truly fear isn't my ambition. What they fear is my audacity to wield it. Torin paused, his skin slowly melting. My name will outlast thrones. My shadow will shape emperors. Spill my blood if you must. But you cannot kill what has already seeped into the deepest pits of everyone's mind. He once again pressed his finger against his temple. I'm no longer a god. Quote. I am an idea. Gods can be killed, but an idea will last for so long as one wields it. I am immortal.